And
It,
I've almost had to tackle to get him to sit down. He is a very busy man, and I almost had to tackle to get him to sit down. This has been a couple years since we've been able to get you here, but we finally got you here, and we are here for some exciting times because we're gonna go over quite a few things. You've got some interesting stories. We've talked over the incident of you getting pulled off stage and the headlight the whole video shooting. But tonight we've got some more interesting stories. We've got talked about you've got a punk rock poster collab coming up that we and quite a few other things going on. Did have some people were shared some clips of our previous interviews just before this, and I did have someone want to say they are very glad you are quite okay after the 94 Woodstock. They were wondering how you guys were doing after that. There was a person left a comment on a clip of that video. They are glad you're okay after the 94 Woodstock. They did wonder about that. And after
well,
the
they must be thinking of when I got pulled off the stage. That was in New Orleans on the warm-up show to Lollapalooza. I was when Nine Inch Nails did Woodstock. I was in Scotland with the Jim Rowe Circus in '94. That was right before the Jim Rowe Circus joined the Downward Spiral tour.
Yeah,
When I
and yeah, that one. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was it. That was my mind's going a mile a minute, but yeah, they were glad you were okay on that one.
Thank you.
And there was another comment that they were the liar incident. They were at there was a person they saw another show where there was a wild fight broke out at another one of your shows at the Liars in Seattle.
Yeah, yeah.
They
That's in the book. I could actually read that. I could read from the book.
But
That
they were wanting to they were at an incident in Seattle where another wild fight broke out at a liar show too.
yeah.
So but
Yeah,
they were
there
that
was
was
the were several incidents on that day. I'll read that story from the book. That's a good one. Um, yeah, there was another fight in Greensboro, North Carolina, and on my I'll give my YouTube page a plug. It's Crazy Man 13, and 13 is spelled out. It's one word, Crazy Man 13, and that's my YouTube page. Please subscribe to my YouTube page. There's lots of liar stuff, but the song that was from that happened right after the late guitarist Jack Hickey, who was the guitarist on the Liars tour I worked with, and Jeff Conley, who is now going through cancer treatment. Um, Jeff and Jack got into a fight on stage. We're slugging each other, and then we went into the song "You Don't Have to Say You Love Me," which is a cover, and that's on the YouTube page.
oh
So
jeez.
I made a video for that, and it's all like liars, flyers, but it's a board recording of the Liars Live in 1988, which is from the Promise is a Promise tour. So, and it's funny because I always tell people, I'm like, when I joined the Liars in 1988, and keep in mind this is in the before, really, really the before times. But I always tell people we live. We were born into the BC. That's how old we are, and that's before computers. And now we're in the AD, which is after digital. So, and it's really true because I mean, like when I joined the Liars, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who said, "Hey, they're looking for a bass player," and they hired me sight unseen over the phone. I'll read this out of the book, but yeah, and it really was crazy. And like in 2 weeks' time, I went from living in Cleveland after death on I just graduated from Cleveland State, and then so I got my bachelor's degree. 2 weeks later, or I got a phone call from a friend of mine in New York City saying the Liars are looking for a bass player. I get a phone call or I call Jeff Conley of the Liars. So I get his phone number and I say, "Hey, I heard you're looking for a bass player." And he hired me sight unseen over the phone and fly up to Boston, stayed with my parents who used to live outside of Boston for a couple days. Then I took a bus into Boston and I met at the South Station by Jeff Conley and the drummer Dave Bass. And it was just crazy fucking times. And this was like a year after I'd played with the Butthole Death on a Stick had opened for the Butthole Surfers. Death on a Stick, my industrial jazz band, had opened for Butthole Surfers. And I mean, I really thought like I'm on a path to making it, And like when I joined the Liars, it was my first like real U.S. Canadian tour, and we literally went around the circumference of the U.S. and Canada. We were like, played a few shows in Boston, went and played in Portland, Maine with BB Buell, who was in her biker rock and roll band, which BB Buell was Todd Rundgren's girlfriend. She's a mother of Liv Tyler, used to be married to Steven Tyler. And a legendary girlfriend. She was like Elvis Costello's girlfriend and legendary musician and just wild. I wouldn't call her a groupie so much as she was just a girlfriend and musician of and friend with all these punk rock people. So she was this other legend. So we played with her, and then literally we're up to Montreal, all the way across Canada, all the way to literally every Saskatoon, Guelph, blah blah blah, like Montreal, Toronto, Guelph, Kitchener, blah blah blah.
Wow.
Saskatoon, Regina, all the way to Vancouver, and then into Seattle, which is where the incident in the book takes place, which I'll read later. But yeah, so the Liars stuff was that was an incredible experience, and yeah, we lost Jack Hickey. I think it was last year or the year before. The years have started to meld. It's so funny. I remember everything up to COVID. Now, since COVID, time has seemed to have collapsed,
Yeah,
and
right, right.
it's hard to remember, like, was that 23 or 24? Or was that, 24 or 25? It was like, so I believe Jack Hickey passed last spring, a year ago last spring, 2025. He died of cancer. And like I said, Jeff Conley, the keyboard's the main guy in Liars. He just had a GoFundMe. He just had his bladder removed. He had bladder cancer.
Oh,
So,
jeez.
yeah, I hope he's doing all right. It's funny in the book because I kind of make him seem like, well, he at the time he was kind of a tyrant. But Jeff is a musical freaking genius. If you ever listen to The Liars, I mean, it's just great, great music. I mean, that first record of theirs called On Fire, spelled Fyre, like the Liars, like everybody calls the Liars the Lears. But anyways, Jeff is a genius songwriter, really great musician. I mean, the just to listen to the drumming, like how unique the drumming is, and that's all Jeff, like telling people what he wanted to play. Like when I did 3 rehearsals with him before I played in front of like 2,000 people at the old Boston Channel when I was up there, and they were just. I mean, Jeff would sit there, and he's a keyboardist in the band and the singer and wrote the music, but I would sit there and rehearsal with him, and he would literally play the drum parts, and then he'd point on the bass where he wanted me with the drumstick. He'd point to the bass note he wanted me to play, and I had to play it exactly how it was on the record, or he'd like turn around and yell at you on stage. But he was really brilliant. I mean, the stuff he wrote, and a very gifted singer and real emotive, and just really had the zeitgeist of that sort of '60s. Um, I mean, they're unique unto themselves. There was bands like the Fleshtones, and so they're the whole West Coast sort of the Bangles and the Rain Parade, Green on Red, a lot of sort of neo psychedelic stuff in the late '80s. But Jeff was way before that. Just like the Fleshtones were. I mean, the Fleshtones are still with us, fortunately. And I guess the Liars played in February. I guess they went down before Jeff's surgery and played in Austin. I guess so. Maybe somebody had some money and said, "Here, I'll pay for a show or something." But I haven't personally been in touch with Jeff other than paying for some money and donating towards his GoFundMe. But the guy's really talented, and I'm honored to have been part of that. And that all happened, before the Nails, before all the other bands and all the
Yeah.
other. So just that was just like one of many like weird paths my life has taken. So, anyways, man, go ahead. Shoot me another
But I wouldn't
question.
say weird path. I'd say it's a very interesting and unique. Just like it's not weird at all. It's very. I love sitting down and just like we chat during interviews. But honestly, what people don't know, me and Marky Ray actually chat quite often in text too. This isn't just a one off. We chat during text too. Like, how many different bands have you actually like worked with in your career? Because I know you've toured with big names, you've also roadied with like the big bands in the 70s. You've worked with
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was coming up when I first started in the industry, it was weird because I got kicked out of boarding school. I'll tell the story again. I got kicked out of boarding school, but even before that, when I was a teenager in the '70s, In 1977, I saw something on, I turned 13 in 1977. I saw something on the Sex Pistols on TV, believe it or not. And believe it or not, it was like a Dick Clark thing, like, music is wild in London, and some shit like that. And I was like, I'd been listening to, I mean, I loved Led Zeppelin. I have an older brother. My brother John is 5 years older than me. So my brother turned me on to like early Bruce Springsteen, you bought, which is really good actually. The first couple albums by Springsteen, especially the Wild, the Innocent, E Street Shuffle, are really a great album. The songs like Kitty's Back and stuff like that. Rosalita's on that too as well. But Kitty's Back is just an amazing song. But also like Bob Dylan, Patti Smith, Jimi Hendrix, Zeppelin was like my band, that I listened to.
Yeah.
Uh, I still love Zeppelin, but some of the gross antics that they did in their management, like Peter Grant did some horrible, horrible things to people from Bill Graham's organization. And if you ever read about the violence that like the Zeppelin crew perpetrated on people, they really were like modern rock and roll terrorists. And, they're all like, oh, we have peace and love. The band claims innocence, but their management were not exactly kind. So I've kind of lost some flavor for some Zeppelin, but I still enjoy their music and listen to them. But around that time, AOR or album oriented rock was dominating the airwaves. Your Boston's, your Kansas, your Foreigners, that kind of stuff, which is all good. And those the something things that should be said about those bands are, I'm not knocking them. They're fabulous musicians, and their music still holds up, and it's something I can listen to it. I consider it a guilty pleasure. But once punk rock came along, and I was a teenager at that formative 13th year, and I heard that stuff, and it was like I was starting to play music then, and it was like, hey, I'm a formative guitar player. I could do that, and then you got to keep in mind too, back in the day, how did we get our information? There was no internet, so we would go to record stores. And before I could drive, my best friend Gordon and I, our parents used to, both my parents were educators. My dad worked at Kent State and worked at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, and my friend Gordon's mother was a social worker. So we used to go over to Kent, Ohio, which is about 11 miles from where I live, and we would hit these record stores over there, and we'd see Ramones records on the rack there, and it's like, wow, what's this? And we bought a Ramones record, and like the Residents. At the same time, we bought the Residents commercial album, which like blew our minds. We had like a lot of influences, like your Zeppelins, your Residents, the Ramones, but also I also liked Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart, which led me back to, now keep in mind I've been a record collector my whole life, and in 1972, Lenny Kaye had put out the Nuggets record, which was a two-record set of all garage rock. And so garage rock and Captain Beefheart and things like that. And I found Captain Beefheart through the Mothers, or in Frank Zappa's band, the Mothers of Invention. And that led me back to sort of garage punk, which predated, proto punk and all the stuff. And that came kind of post Beatles in the 1960s. And of course, in Detroit, you had the MC5 and Iggy and the Stooges. So that whole stuff kind of bled into my psyche. And I went away to boarding school in 78, and was really started playing guitar then. And I went to this weird Quaker boarding school in Southern Ohio, and all these kids from all over the world were there. I mean, the Quakers are quite, um, they all they'll take anybody, so we had kids from all over the world, Africa, India, people from all over the world there, so it was an international community, and plus kids, Quakers, Amish kids, Mennonites. So I got exposed to all kinds of stuff, European dance, and I'm talking like literal European dance music, like old timey stuff where women
Yeah.
are dancing in flowered skirts and shit, not dance music like, Kraftwerk or EDM or some shit, that wasn't quite there yet. I mean, though we did like Kraftwerk. But so we would have these weekends when we would go back and forth from our homes to this boarding school. So we would hit these record stores in Kent. We would buy Ramones records, and then like the B-52s album came out in 79, which just like blew our minds. And we started buying records left and right. I mean, and in 78, I found a copy of Richard Hell, the Voidoids Blank Generation at a National Record Mart in St. Clairsville, Ohio. And we brought that back to boarding school and we put it on, and it just completely blew our minds. So it was like, and it was like $1.99. you know so like things like that like bled into my psyche, and of course this whole time I was playing, you know I was learning, Neil Young songs, and I had all the song books and stuff. Neil Young was real big at the time, and because Rust Never Sleeps came out, and that had, tributes to Johnny Rotten in it and that kind of stuff. And it turns out, we were reading, like I said, we learned all this stuff from the local record stores. We would read see There's a local magazine here called Scene Magazine that was quite the reader thing. It was a free weekly magazine, so you'd see who was playing around, and you'd read about these different bands that were coming through. And Chrissy Hind is from here, so the Pretenders came through in 1980, and that
Nice.
record was really important. And but we learned, hey, there's this band Perubu in our backyard, and hey, there's this band Devo from Akron, and we're like, wow, So we would buy all these records, Devo and the Pretenders and Perubu records, and it completely blew our minds. So in 1982, I got thrown in February 11th of 1982. I got kicked out of boarding school because it was I was banging one of the girls whose dad was a bigwig in the Quaker meeting, and they didn't like that, so they threw me out of there. Uh,
Oops.
just supposed to commiserate. It was a co-ed school, but what we were teenagers, fucking teenagers for Christ's sake. So, anyways, I got kicked out of boarding school. I moved to Cleveland with my best friend Gordon. So I went from the hills of Southern Ohio to living in Cleveland Heights, with my best friend Gordon, who'd been kicked out of the same boarding school a year before, or asked not to return. He didn't get kicked out; he was asked not to return. So we moved into this like studio apartment in Cleveland Heights, and we just immediately got absorbed into the culture. I started playing in a band called Johnny Action with some friends from the old neighborhood. I was born in Cleveland, and our parents were friends with all these neighborhood kids who, by the time I got kicked out of boarding school and moved back to Cleveland, we were all adults, or 18 at least, 18, 19, etc. And I formed a band with some of those kids in this band, Johnny Action, who were living in Cleveland Heights. And the punk band, the Pagans, had reformed. This was sort of Mach 2 version of them. And a friend of mine from boarding school had left boarding school in 1980, graduated, moved to New York City, and was playing in a rockabilly band because when I was at boarding school, that was another influence, was rockabilly. The Stray Cats album that you could get on import in like 78 or 79, maybe when it came out. I think it was 79. And
Nice.
lost my mind to rockabilly and got an upright bass and started playing upright bass.
And I've
And
heard you play upright.
yeah, so I fell in love with that as well. So rockabilly was all part and parcel. So I started to go back and become more of a music historian at that point too. I'm like, I'd hear something like an Eddie Cochran song and be like, "Who's that?" And go back and find, oh, it's Eddie Cochran. Everybody knew Elvis, but it was like, oh, then you discover, oh, Ricky Nelson, and like Lonesome Town or something, or
Hmm.
and all those, but there was Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, and then all the old Sun records, obviously Johnny Cash and all those, Roy Orbison, and all the great rockabilly cats that were on Sun records. And of course the Cramps. The Cramps were from here as well, and they were actually locals until about 1970. I mean, they moved up to New York in 76, but they would Lux Interior, who I would later work for the Cramps. Lux was from Stowe, which is, 5 miles that way from my house. And, I got to know Lux's brother, Michael, fairly well because he played in a local band called The Action. So all this stuff was sort of coalescing around after I got kicked out of boarding school. So my friend Rich, who was up in New York in this band, The Kingpins, it turns out the Kingpins drummer was this guy, Brian Hudson. And Brian was the original drummer in the Pagans. So they would book gigs. The Kingpins would come out and book a Midwest tour with the Pagans. So I used to go up to New York after boarding school and go and work with my friend with the Kingpins up in New York, and like just had my mind blown because that was old New York, when there was Danceteria and CBGBs and all the great clubs were open, and I think Max's Kansas City had closed by that time. I never made it there, but all the great clubs were happening. There was still great music to be had in New York, and it was still a cesspool and a drug den and everything, and it was crazy. And so I would work for the Kingpins in New York, and then when the Kingpins came out here, I roadied with the Kingpins and the Pagans on a tour. So I started working for the infamous Pagans as a roadie, and so I did some Midwest touring with those guys, and that kind of started my mercenary career. Even though I was a musician, I was still playing. I was still playing with bands. That band Johnny Action, and but I was touring with the Pagans and the Kingpins and learning about the business and how we went about loading in and loading out and becoming a roadie and doing that kind of stuff. Because you're a roadie before you learn any skills, then you become more of a technician. So I was a roadie first, especially because I had a clean driving record and could help out and still had a good back and could lug and lift things and load things in and out and make the band look professional. So that was a lot of fun. And the drinking age in Ohio was still 18 at the time. So I could get into bars anywhere. You didn't have to use a fake ID like I did in high school. My brother's fake ID, which was his real ID, which was my fake ID. Anyways, just funny shit. But as time would have it, there was a great local band called the F Models that I put out a CD of theirs a few years ago. You can find it on eBay and sold out. It used to be available. You can find it probably on eBay and maybe Discogs. But it's called In Loving Memory. It's a two CD set that I put out of the F Models. But they were our local band that I used to go see every weekend, even when I was at boarding school. And Johnny Action, that band, that Cleveland Heights band. I played my first professional gig in the summer. It was actually it was yeah, it was late summer, September of 1982. We opened for the F Models in Kent, Ohio, at this club called JB's Down. JB's downstairs. There was JB's upstairs where the Numbers Band played, and then there was JB's downstairs where all the punk bands played, like Hammer Damage and all the old punk bands from that era. And Devo had played there. All sorts of people had played there over the years. So we opened for the F Models, and that started my professional career as a player, getting paid that is as a musician. And we ended up that night, the guy who had booked the show, a guy named Johnny Teagle, had a band called Johnny Clampett and the Walkers, another Johnny band, and they were a rockabilly band. And when I used to play with Johnny Action, I used to sing a couple of old rockabilly numbers with Johnny Action, and they saw me sing, and they were like, "Hey, we're looking for a singer because our singer just left." So I ended up singing with Johnny Clampett and the Walkers and playing upright bass with them on occasion, and that started the whole musician slash mercenary thing that because I would go from group to group to group to group. So that led to from Johnny Action to Johnny Clampett and the Walkers. And I played with them and sang with them for about 6 to 8 months. And then I think it was about maybe February or March of '83, Johnny was like, "Marky, you're too serious, and we want to make more money." So he kicked me out of Johnny Clampett and the Walkers. So I moved to Cleveland and moved back to Cleveland and moved into this apartment in Cleveland Heights, right around the corner from this Coventry street, which is sort of like the hip street in Cleveland Heights, where everybody had all their shops and great record stores and stuff, still there. And turns out my neighbors were a legendary Kent, now Cleveland band called the Human Switchboard. And they were kind of like Cleveland's answer to the Velvet Underground, or what they want. They were along the lines of a Lou Reed sort of drawl kind of Velvet Underground kind of thing. They were really popular in New York and kind of blown up in Cleveland. And they were in need. They were about to start an East Coast tour, so they were. No, I had known them because they had a record store in Kent. I'd known them since I was like 12. Okay, because once again, I used to go over there with my friend Gordon and his mom and my parents and stuff and buy records at different stores. They had a record store in Kent, Ohio called the Kent Record Exchange, and it was upstairs from this book. So you had to run up these stairs and find this like hole in the wall rental space where they had their own personal record collection they were selling off, and we bought lots of records from them. And so I'd known them since I was about 12, and then we renewed our friendship when I was there. And we lived in the basement, and they were on the first floor. And I ran into Bob one day, the lead singer. Bob Pfeiffer is his name. He lives out in California. He's working with another. He's Alice Cooper's archivist now. He's Bob's done many things. He ran
Wow.
Hollywood Records for years. He signed Queen to their last record deal. Bob's very famous in the industry. But I ran into Bob, and he's like, "Hey, we're getting ready to do an East Coast tour. We need a roadie. You want to come?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I hopped in the van, and we went up to New York City and played like CBGBs, and we played Danceteria, and did a bunch of showcases for different record labels. I remember we were at Danceteria, and fucking Andy Warhol's in the audience, and yeah, I mean, just kind of crazy shit like that, and it was just amazing, like once again mind blowing. And we went in the studio. Okay, we went in the studio with Mike Thorne. Now, if you're not familiar with Mike Thorne, he produced Wires One Four Wires, Pink Flag, and I'm not sure if he produced 154. I'd have to go back and look, but regardless, Pink Flag, and he also got the Sex Pistols signed to EMI. He's a very famous producer. Produced the Rock Cats and a bunch of other bands. Very famous.
The name I can't picture everything with him, but the
Yeah,
name sets off
yeah,
different light bulbs. Once you said the name, it's like I know the name. I can't place
yeah. So
everything with the name, but I
So,
know
so
the name.
we were in the record plant with Mike Thorne while they were doing demos, and I was just sitting there in awe and like fucking wow. And and it's crazy because at the time Yoko Ono was across the hall making Season of Broken Glass, and I didn't see her, but I was in her presence. Just knowing that Yoko was across the hallway was enough for me. And I'd go downstairs, and there'd be like Fonzie Thornton hanging out in the lounge. And Fonzie Thornton I'd just seen on the last Roxy Music Tour. Fonzie Thornton is a famous backup singer and singer performer. And he was, the nicest guy in the world, just talking to him in the lounge. And I'm just like, I mean, that was New York back in the day. You'd see David Johansen walking down, St. Mark's Place or some shit. And you'd be like, oh my God, it's just such a small world.
Yeah.
So it was just mind blowing. So then we went up to Boston, and we played a bunch of bands up there. One called Native Tongue that was amazing, and I'm a huge Mission of Burma fan. They had broken up by that point, but just knowing I was in Boston again, and this is pre-Liars and all that stuff, but it was just amazing to go up there and play these venues and roadie for the Switchboard and just have an amazing time. And I ended up meeting their booking agent was this guy Bob Lawton, and Bob and I became friends because years later when I was out on Lollapalooza and I shared a tour bus with Rollins Band. This is jumping ahead a bit, but Bob Lawton was his booking agent, so I ran into Bob again. So it's just, once again, it's a very small world of all these people that, are still around and still working and doing whatever. But it was just a really crazy time. So I did that tour with the Human Switchboard. I came back to Cleveland and started another. While I was out of town, I missed a legendary show with REM and the Replacements playing at Peabody's Down Under in Cleveland. And I was disappointed because I had the Chronic Town EP by REM, which I really liked a lot, and Murmur had just come out and they were touring on Murmur, but I liked the Replacements even more. And after that, I either saw or worked every Replacements show that ever came to Cleveland after that.
Oh,
So
no joke. I love the replacements.
yeah,
The replacements are awesome.
yeah. So that was well, I'll tell you a funny story because like during that time, um, I had just played a solo show with by my obviously by myself, but at this really crappy restaurant behind this Coventry Yard Mall. There used to be this little shitty bar, and I used to go down there and when drinking age was still 18, I'd spill my tears into the beer with and talk to the cute waitresses there at this place called the Clam House. And one night, this woman, my friend Laura, who was one of the barmaids there, was like. Oh, the we were supposed to have a band in tonight, but they canceled. Could you just come by and play some music? And now I'd never done a solo show in my life, so I just went down there and made some guitar noises with my chorus pedal and tried to play some shitty rockabilly and did not pull it off. And you know, the guy, I remember the club owner coming over to me being like, "I think you need to work on your craft," and I'm like, "Yeah, no shit." So, anyways, but regardless of that, my friend Alan or my friend Laura went home and told her boyfriend Franklin about me, and Franklin told this guy Alan Grandy, who happened to be there this night, Alan happened to see him this crappy solo show. He ended up coming up and introducing himself to me, and he's like, "Hey, I'm Alan Grady. I'm from this band, The Terrible Parade, and we're looking for a second guitarist. And I like what you're doing." And I'm like, "Wow, you know." So that opportunity presented itself, and I ended up woodshedding with Alan Grady for the next 4 or 5 months, learning writing counter, lead and arpeggiated guitar parts. So we both played lead and rhythm at the same time. We were contemporaries of REM, but we were a two guitar band instead of a one guitar band, and that started my foray into becoming a Terrible Parade member in '83, and then starting from '84, really '83 until 1988, I played with the Terrible Parade. But a funny story. We go to there used to be a place underneath the original. Well, it wasn't it was a second iteration of the Agora on East 24th Street in Chester and Cleveland, and the replacements were playing down in the Pop Shop, which was below the Agora. It used to be called the Mistake, and then it changed its name in 1982 to the Pop Shop. So we go down there, and Alan snuck a joint into the bathroom, and we're smoking this joint in the men's room. And we look over, and there's this disheveled guy in the corner, kind of slightly balding, and this sort of like beige members only coat, like a thrift store like looking guy. And we're like, "Wow, who's that?" And we're like, and he comes over, "Hey, can I hit that?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure." And so he hit this joint. We're smoking a joint and just kind of making small talk, and we're like, and then he's like, "Thanks, man." And he leaves, and like Alan and I finish the joint, and like, we're standing there talking for a minute, and then we go out and like we look up on stage. It's the same guy we were smoking a joint with, only he's in a pink tutu, and it's Bob Stinson of the Replacements
Oh, jeez.
on the Hootenanny tour when Tommy was like 14 or 15, and like the roof is only like 6'5", maybe 7 feet tall, and Tommy's doing scissor kicks with like 3-inch creepers on and shit. It was hilarious, and they were amazing, on the Hootenanny tour. So that was really funny. So yeah, I played with the Terrible Parade. We started recording in early 1984 at a place called Beat Farm Studios. That was with Helen McGinty and Chris Burgess, and that started. We made a flexi disc first. We made a 3-song flexi disc with 3 songs on it. And you remember flexi discs? You could put them in. They usually came in magazines, and you'd put them on a regular LP and put a quarter on it, and then you put the needle on, and it would play.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so we made 1,000 flexi discs from Evatone in Florida. That used to be the one company. They used to supply flexi discs for like National Geographic and stuff. Like the songs of the humpback whale was on that. And anyways, so we we had that flexi disc. We would send it out to record labels, and it actually got written up back in the day when press was something. When before Option magazine was Option, it was OP magazine. So we got written up in Op, and then Rock Pool, and maybe Gavin Report, which would reported college radio station stuff. It reported all the lists of what was being played in college radio across the country, the Gavin Report. So you could like get if you subscribe to the Gavin Report, you could see, oh, our record's being played in Seattle, Washington, or Portland, Oregon, or Boston, or wherever. So
yeah.
started the Terrible Parade started doing forays to different cities. We'd go to Dayton or Columbus or Cincinnati, and then eventually we put out a 4-song EP and toured the East Coast on this 4-song EP that came out on After Hours Records, which was a Cleveland label run by the late Randy Meggett, who worked at Record Rendezvous, which is where the term, at least in terms of rock and roll, was formed. Rock and roll, as you know, is an old euphemism, an old blues euphemism for having sex. But Alan Freed co-opted it for his Moondog music show, his radio show, along with Leo Mintz, who ran Record Rendezvous, and that was where Randy and the legendary Jim Jones from Perubu, all the great punks, Michael Weldon, who eventually ran Psychotronic film magazine. Everybody worked at Record Rendezvous or Record Den. I worked at Record Den downtown eventually with Scott Krause, the drummer of Perubu, and Andrew Klimek from Death on a Stick. So we all worked at record stores and shit like that during our college days and that kind of shit. So I joined the Terrible Parade in 83, 84, started college, going to Cleveland State. uh, from 84 to 88. And I like studied with some amazing people there. There was this amazing artist. I learned lithography with this guy, Marvin Jones. And if anybody listening out there wants to learn about really great, and I say pathetic in the greatest sense, Marvin was really into these, what he used to call pathetic artwork. And he would make these amazing lithographs of all his artwork, and he has thousands of pictures still touring the world. He died tragically 30 some years ago, and he burned a lot of his work before he died. A lot of artists do that, but he burned a lot of his work. But a lot of his lithography stuff is just really amazing. But I studied with him. I studied lithography with him and another guy named Dick Schaefer, who was an amazing ceramist, and a really interesting music guy named Rudolph Bubalo, who was an electronic music pioneer. And he was a conductor and a really fabulous guy. I think he has since passed on as well. But we were using old EML synthesizers and two-track recorders, and these were classes I had at Cleveland State University. So I was, making tape loops and doing all sorts of stuff with, reel-to-reel tapes and all that. So
Mm.
I've always really diverse influences of music and stuff I liked. So I played with the Terrible Parade, like I said, up and through 88. But in 1985, the roommate of the manager of the Terrible Parade was a guy named Rick LaFauve, and Rick is now Tina, and Tina lives in Chicago. And but Rick at the time was a WRUW DJ, and there was Chris Hagen, myself, uh, Rick LaFauve, Gary Barkoff, and Larry Collins, and we all started jamming at the WRUW Studio A on just primitive instruments, pieces of metal, because this predated Einstürzende Neubauten and some of those bands that use metal and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we were very much into industrial music, and we loved Perubu and Faust and Cluster and that kind of stuff, and all sorts of stuff, and all the things that were being played on the radio, and I mean. Just college radio is really where we got, along with the old record stores, was where we learned the alternative before the second British or third British wave with all your modern English and your culture clubs, and which is nothing wrong with that, flock of seagulls, all that stuff, and the prevalence of MTV making its way into college radio. There was all the great music of that time, MX80 Sound, The Residents, Suburban Lawns or whatever, and of course all the West Coast stuff that was happening, the Germs, X, Dead Kennedys, hardcore stuff that was happening. There was a great hardcore scene here that no one ever really talks about, but Zero Defects, the Guns, the Dark. There was a great band called Spike and Vein that were contemporaries of the Terrible Parade that were amazing, and two brothers, Chris and Andrew Merrick, who are no longer with us. But they put out their stuff has been reissued on Bob Griffin's Scat Records, and Scat Records is still available here in Cleveland. Scat Records are the ones that put out the original B1000 by Guided by Voices and Under the Bushes and Under the Stars, and the other, like three very early Guided by Voices records. Anyways, so we in 1985, Death on a Stick loosely formed with the five DJs from WREW and myself, and then we did a bunch of shows as Death on a Stick, and then everybody left except for Rick, myself, and Gary, and so we went to Beat Farm Studios, which Terrible Parade had inaugurated and got rolling, and we made a 4-song cassette called Steam. And put that out, and believe it or not, that got a write up, an option, like a really positive write up. And this was 1985 when we put that out, and we did a cover, like sort of a spoof mock-up of Kashmir by Led Zeppelin.
Hmm.
And this is when Zeppelin was still sacrosanct, not like nobody covered Zeppelin back then. And so we did this sort of send up of that, and it got like amazing radio airplay, and as well as some industrial soundtrack kind of stuff. And we were able to tour. We were going down. We played in New York. Well, we played like Tin Pan Alley, and we caught the attention of Gary Lucas from Captain Beefheart's band, who was an A&R guy at Sony CBS. and he tried in vain to get us signed to Daniel Miller's Mute Records, but it never happened. But we did some showcases in New York, and we'd play with like Crack House, and we played PS 122 with like Mofungo and The Scene Is Now and Phantom Toll Booth, and then we played CBGBs with the Volcano Suns and Carney Hild, which was Ralph Carney and David Hild from Shockabilly, and the Volcano Suns was Peter Prescott's bands from Mission of Burma. So I mean, we got some great gigs in New York, and got great exposure written up in the Village Voice up there. But we'd come back to Cleveland and do these shows, and and we were an industrial jazz band. And nobody knew what to do with us, and then years later we would reform, and nobody knew what to do with us because we were an industrial jazz band.
And you know, I
But
listen. I listen to a lot of your tracks is still.
yeah,
I'm big into jazz. I'm big into industrial. So I do listen to. I have actually a playlist on the channel actually of you guys of Death on a Stick on our Junkie Base, and I do go and listen. I really love Jerry Lewis. I think Jerry Lewis is
yeah,
very catchy. So
that was done completely live, direct to master, no overdubs. And
no
it's amazing.
joke.
Yeah, no, that was done completely live. Yeah, yeah. A number of those cuts were obviously Kashmir wasn't, Engine Room, and the stuff from Steam wasn't. But Jerry Lewis, I'm trying to think of some of the other stuff. I mean, there's a whole record's worth. Basically, what the last record was called Ballast Resistors, Dreams of Contentment was done direct to master. It was July 5th, 1987. We recorded that with Chris Burgess in his studio, direct to master, right in his fucking living room. It was amazing. We just banged that out, and it was. I was so proud of that record. That was really cool. Yeah, Jerry Lewis and It Always Rains in Downtown Cleveland, one take. you know yeah, we did some amazing things. I mean, we really did. And we continued to play up through and that version of Death on a Stick minus Dave Norris was Andrew and myself, and then Paul Strachan from the Terrible Parade was that group that opened up for Butthole Surfers. Yeah, Dave left the band shortly after we played a WRUW outdoor concert in the fall of 1987, and then we played with December 4th of 87. We played with Butthole Surfers at the Newport, and when we opened for the Butthole Surfers, Death on a Stick did. They loved us, and we formed a bond then, and that's when they were at their height. I mean, they were touring on Locust Abortion Technician, and it was the original five. Teresa Nervosa, King Coffee, Paul Leary, Jeff Pincus, and Gibby, and Kathleen, the naked dancer, and they loved us. They were like, "You guys are weird," and I was like, "Dude, we've arrived." The Butthole Surfers think we're weird, so that was awesome. So yeah, Paul Strachan, the drummer from the Terrible Parade, sat in with us and that did a great job. So yeah, I've got some pictures from that, which is amazing. So that was really cool. And once again, that was before the Liars, and I thought I made it, and like so, Death on a Stick continued into '88, as did the Terrible Parade, and by about May of 1988, Terrible Parade has sort of like run its course, and I felt like um, we should. Alan and I are still dear friends. We talk all the time, but I felt like, and we've discussed this. We should have kept putting out records and continuing to do stuff, because if we stuck around, we might have done something. Because once again, we were ahead of our time. It was before the whole Nirvana second wind of alternative music actually breaking up, because we've been part of the first alternative music in the early breakout, but Cleveland was virtually ignored from about 1980 to about 1990, when Nine Inch Nails just started to take off, but I'll get to that in a minute. So in May of '85, I left the Terrible Parade, and I continued to play. I finished up college, and continued to play with Death on a Stick through that period. I worked a summer at Nautica. I'd worked the few previous summers at Nautica, which is an outdoor pavilion, as a stage crew, and I worked for everybody. You asked about all the bands I'd worked for during starting in about 1986, 87, 88. I was working at one. These are all the different jobs I had during college. I worked at Record
Jeez.
Den in Cleveland. which was a record store. I did retail. Scott Krause from Peru and Andrew Klimek worked there. Scott was my boss. And I'd actually worked at Record Den even way back in 1982. And Edgar Reynolds of this famous Cleveland band, the Wild Giraffes, was my boss then. But was working I was working there. I was also working at Warner Brothers, WEA, Warner Electric Atlantic, in their promotions department. But I was doing that part time. But promotions was their mailroom. But it was a great job because we got all the free. This is after the advent of CDs, so I used to take home stacks of CDs every weekend. Like
Nice.
releases. So I had the most amazing time doing that. So I also started working. A friend of mine, this guy Mark O'Shea, who had been the sound man for the Terrible Parade, had also started like working with other bands and touring with bands and running sound. And he got hired by Belkin Productions, which is now part of Live Nation, and we both started working at the Richfield Coliseum, which is no longer there. And so we started, like being runners. It shows like that. I worked for like Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith, and when I was working at We, a Guns N' Roses record had just come out, but it hadn't blown up yet. So I saw them at Music Hall. I got to know those guys a little bit. And then that all plays into the future as well, because etc. But so I was doing that, and then I started doing some non-union stagehand work, like building stages. I worked for the Who, building the stage at the Cleveland Stadium, doing their dressing rooms with some of the Belkin people. I did the same thing for um, Pink Floyd for half a year, building stages with them. Not even half a year, but a month here, a month there, doing different cities in and around on the Distant Sound of Thunder tour. And then I worked for the Rolling Stones for like 3 weeks on the Steel Wheels tour, building the stages and doing their dressing rooms in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Detroit, Pontiac at the Silverdome. And I was on all these different crews doing, building stages 110 feet in the air, doing the,
Just
building like giant erector set shit. So I was doing all that stuff as well. So I was getting well rounded in all these different things. And, lo and behold, the end of the summer, after working at Nautica as a stagehand, I mean, I've worked for everybody from Sam Kinison to fucking Stevie Ray Vaughan to Santana, Wayne Shorter, you name it. Anybody coming through, George Thorogood, you name it, we worked for them. During that summer, Elvis Costello with Mark Rebo on guitar, Tom Waits. All the shows that came through at that point, I was working, doing different things, every different capacity, from dressing rooms to running to stagehand work. So I was learning the whole business, plus, booking Death on a Stick stuff and learning about all the record company stuff. So I was really building up my resume and building up, and you could do that back in the day. You could find work that way, and that's what we did. So right after 2 weeks after I graduated from Cleveland State of August of '88, because I had a summer class, I had to finish up that last little bit. But I went right on tour with the Liars and toured with the Liars for 4 months, which was amazing in its own right. And then the Liars led to Humble Pie. I worked with Humble Pie shortly thereafter, and after the Liars tour, because the Liars tour only lasted 4 months. And I'll read from the Liars story from the book in a minute. But and that led to I came back after the Liars and joined another '60s type Cleveland band called the New Salem Witch Hunters, also playing bass with them like I did with the Liars, and worked for Humble Pie for the better part of a year. I did roadie work with them. Didn't play with them. I was asked to join them, but ended up working with Nine Inch Nails, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I guess since I haven't read the Liar story, I might as well read that just because it's a good work. It's a good People will get a kick out of this, and it'll be forever saved uh, uh, in here. So this is a new copy of the book, by the way. I know it probably looks backwards on there, but my dear friend Doug Broom and Doug kindly helped me reprint this. It's got a new cover, uh,
awesome.
color photo, bio on the back. I got some nice flyers in here. That's a Kent flyer, and then the Death on a Stick flyer opening for Butthole Surfers with a little blurb and stuff. So this is available on eBay if you just look up Rock and Roll Mercenary book. You
Okay,
know,
and we'll get links to that in the YouTube video. I'll make sure once the YouTube does all its processing and everything and stuff in the next couple days, we'll get all the links to your books and stuff and your YouTube channel and everything.
this is a Nine Inch Nails. That's what it looks like, an empty Wembley Stadium right before Nine Inch Nails opened for Guns N' Roses.
Wow.
That's our gear in the very front there, in
I
front of
remember
Guns.
you telling that story, and you were talking about you guys were getting yelling Wiener Schnitzel at 12 o'clock and stuff getting thrown at
Yeah,
you guys because they had no idea what was going on because the album hadn't released over there yet. They had no idea what Nine Inch Nails was, and you guys got
yeah,
stuck with Guns N'
that was
Roses.
in Germany. Yeah, yeah. So this is the infamous story of the Liars at Central Tavern that your friend was talking about, the one who saw us up in Seattle. So this is about the Liars playing at the legendary. This is chapter 18, and oh, this is a comic version of myself on the. This was drawn by Pete Friedrich. That's me from his. He did a little comic strip of me called Rock and Roll Mercenary, and that's the drawing of me and the Liars, but the names were changed to protect the innocent. But this is from the story. This is called, and now some funny for your reading pleasure, a few select funny ass crazy true stories. Liars Tour Tales from 1988. I thought I'd share a couple of my funny stories of my days from the Liars. I joined Boston's favorite sons, the Liars, just after graduating from Cleveland State University in August of 1988. My friend Rich Thomas, ex Kingpins, Floor Kiss, and Full Time Men, and others, told me they were looking for a bassist after he had hung out with Jeff, Mono Man Conley, on a Lost Weekend. They called him Mono Man because he used to collect mono singles. That's why they called him Mono Man. He claims that name is dead now, but anyways, that's fine. I called Jeff and they agreed to hire me sight unseen over the phone. Backstory: I had seen the Liars at the old Peabody's Down Under in the flats of Cleveland in 1984. Their first album, On Fire, had been released and it had become a big college radio hit that fall. As I stood watching the band run through their set, I see Jeff, very bipolar and very drunkenly, yelling at the band. He carried on, yells at the band some more, had a temper tantrum of some sort, and finishes with some more yelling at the band and no encore. I remarked to Kevin Kelly of the band The Pink Holes, who happened to be standing next to me, "Man, I'd hate to be in a band with that guy, with that asshole." I said, actually. Not 4 years later, here I am being met at Boston South Station by that very AH, Jeff Conley, and the drummer he was yelling at all those years ago at Peabody's Down Under, Dave Bass. That's Dave's actual name. We all got down to business very quickly as there was a tour of the entire US and Canada and a number of local shows to serve as warm-up slash rehearsal shows for the tour. We had 3 rehearsals, a small show in Connecticut, one more rehearsal to learn a single, and then a show at the Channel in Boston in front of 2,000 people. Cool beans, indeed. So that's a Boston joke. Boston beans. Never mind. Okay. So I go from zero to hero overnight. Sorry. Well, it fits well. Old Thickness Boy goes from relative obscurity in the Midwest to a famous Boston band slash US slash Canadian tour overnight. Me thinketh I've arrived. This particular lineup featured myself on bass. I was the Liars' ninth bass player, replacing Matt Miklos, and of course left off Pete Frames. If you're not familiar who Pete Frame is, he used to do what was called the Rock Family Tree. The Liars Family Tree, which was included in the artwork for A Promise is a Promise, the record we were touring on. Hence, the frosting of the dog's balls spewed here. That's a British expression. You're spewing the frosted dog's balls. Anyways, so that's when you're pissed off. Oh well, at least I have the stories. So this was Jeff on keyboards, vocals, glass bottles that he used as percussion, screwdrivers, and alcohol. Dave Bass on drums, and God's gift to rock and roll, rest his soul. At least he thought so. Jack Hickey, ex Turbines on guitar. Rest in peace, Jack. I mean that sincerely. Needless to say, we all got on like oil and water, add vinegar. Dave was crazy in a charming kind of way, if there is such a thing. Jeff, though incredibly talented, was an exceptionally high maintenance sociopath, and that's being nice. And Hickey was full of himself, and me, well, I was just green to touring with nut jobs and just happy to be working at all. As I could write a whole book about this tour, I'll spare you the fine details. We had been on tour in Canada for the past 3 weeks, and we had all been at each other's throats for the last few days. We had crossed the border back into the U.S. and were playing at the Central Tavern in downtown Seattle. As Dave Bass and I slid up to the bar before the show, I said to him, "If Jeff yells at me one more time, I'm going to kick the shit out of him." Dave was like, "Just relax, man. He's a dick. Don't let it bother you." All right. Okay. I'll just try to chill, I exclaimed. Now, we never used a set list. Jeff just used to call out of songs with a 1, 2, 3, 4. And as we started into Soapy, Jeff turned and glared at Dave. "You're fucking playing it wrong," he yelled at Dave, starting into the intro. "Fuck you," Dave yelled back. As Jeff stepped up onto the drum riser to grab the sticks out of Dave's hands, Dave pushes Jeff off the drum riser, and as he attempts to sit back down on his drum throne, he shockingly ends up falling off his drum throne and the drum riser. As Dave attempts to regain his footing and his composure after shoving Jeff, I see Jeff laughing hysterically at Dave's tumble while standing right at mid-stage. As time seems to slow, out of the corner of my eye, I see Dave's 15-pound drum throne launched into midair and aimed straight at Jeff's head. As I'm standing less than 10 feet from Jeff, now in extreme slow motion as I see it, his head explodes. Fucking blam! With a sickening thud, and blood goes flying everywhere as the crowd goes from ah to ooh, such as when someone unplugs a generator with a pew. Jeff falls over as far as someone actually can without actually falling over. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Still, with blood gushing from an open gash in his face, screams, "I'm gonna kill you, Bass!" The crowd is freaking out as we all are on stage. As several people bring, I ask several people to bring towels for Jeff that I hand to him. He promptly proceeds to throw them on the stage, preferring to bleed profusely and show his badge of honor and to show the crowd his backstabbing band had done him wrong. Now, we had played for at least another hour while Jeff continued to bleed for effect. He later required 10 stitches in his face and forehead. The rest, they say, is history. This particular tale has taken on mythic proportions, as I have heard many famous people who were there over the years to tell the story, only for me to tell them that I was the bassist on that tour and watch their jaws really drop. Turns out members of that famous grunge era artist happened to really see that show, including future members of Green River, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, and the Dwarves, to name a few. Now there is an answer story for the for the Seattle incident. Backstory number two. 2 weeks before I joined the band, Dave Bass had fallen asleep at the wheel and crashed the band's other van just as the insurance had lapsed. Poor Dave. Uh, as Jeff had bullied him into buying another van, and Jeff bullied him into buying another van if he wanted to remain the drummer for the upcoming tour that I was soon to join. True story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The tragically funny and sad part is we still had roughly 3.5 months left on this tour. Yikes. A few weeks after playing a very drunken set in Oklahoma City, it was in a wonderful mood after donning a whole bottle of vodka starts in on Dave, who is driving the van off into the night. As we were all about 100 miles from Dallas, driving overnight as we often did with no place to sleep, Jeff, "I'm going to sue you, Bass, and get this van for fucking up my face, you asshole." Dave, "Fuck you, Jeff." Jeff, drunkenly, "Fuck you, Bass. I'm going to sue you and get the van for fucking up my face." Dave, screaming and very agitated, "Oh, yeah? Well, I could kill us all right now." Hickey and me from the back seats of the van. "Dave, no, stop. Dave, mellow out, dude. Dave." Dave floors the van. The tach starts to peg. Me and Hickey, "Dave, stop. No, mellow out." Dave grabbed Jeff by the collar, spitting and hopping ass mad. "You motherfucker, you goddamn motherfucker, I could kill us all right now." Me and Hickey, "Dave, no, stop, ah,
Oh,
stop," with the gun flat out. Hickey and myself are still freaking. Dave floors the van. We're starting to careen out of control. Oh shit, Dave, stop. Fuck, no. Dave again grabs Jeff by the collar. I'll fucking slit your throat, motherfucker, and repeats it twice more. Still speeding and on the edge of oblivion. Hickey and I are finally cool Dave down enough to get him to think straight for a moment. As Jeff attempts one blithering bolt of bravado, he fortunately passes out with a fuck you, bass. He instantly crumples like a cheap suit into the passenger seat. Dave pulls over, still yelling and angry. He shoves Jeff again, muttering, cocksucking fucking asshole. I'll drive, I shout.
Oh my god.
Sorry. I got all teary eyed remembering that. No, actually, it's my allergies, but still, I am sad to think of those days.
Oh my
Needless,
god. That would be a hell of a tour.
needless to say, I survived that tour and many others fraught with desperate abandon. These stories are just two of our many of our 4 months together. As we made it back to Boston, after that tour, the band played a series of breakup shows as Jeff decided to move the band out to San Diego to perform with a bunch of cool scene mods from out there. Actually, there was a scene of mods who used to ride their mopeds and Vespas out there at that time. So the last time I saw them, we all went about our goodbyes. Jeff just sped off into the night with a bye, Hickey with a later, and Dave, who agreed to drop me off with all my gear at with all my band gear at the train station, bolted without so much as a goodbye. I took Amtrak back home. Lest you think my tales are all sad and moist with regret, there is some of that. However, I did enjoy my time with the band, and I do respect the other guys I toured with. We were as much a team as we 4 guys in a van could be. I'm most edified for my experiences, and I consider it to be the pinnacle of 1980s pre-Nirvana underground touring. Truthfully, it was a lot of fun. I learned a great deal about human nature and got to see the USA and Canada by van. I met lots of kindred spirits, new friends, and visited some of my old ones. The whole tour was a hoot, and I'm a better person for it. I'm glad I did it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat, truth be told. I recently saw some gig footage of the Liars on YouTube, and I got to say, Jeff is still rocking with the best of them, still yelling at his band and carrying on, but at least he's sober and a little better for it. And I'm happy to have been part of it. I just can't believe that it's been over. It says in the book here, 20 friggin' years. It's actually been like 32 or 33 years since then. After the band broke up in December of 1988, I returned to Cleveland to start another one of my many paths. Even though many others have forgotten that I was there, I will never forget my time in the Liars. so,
Wow. That is
so,
wild, wild, wild.
now people really enjoy that story. And it's all true, man. Every stitch of that is true. So yeah, so I came back to Cleveland after that tour. I ended up joining this band, the New Salem Witch Hunters, as their bass player, and I played with them for a couple of years and recorded some with them. And during that time, I was working with Humble Pie, and I ended up working a live record that they put out that was pretty cool, and then they kind of went away. And during that time, my friend Mark O'Shea had gotten hold of the tour management gig for Nine Inch Nails. Nine Inch Nails had released first some singles in about 1989, and then Pretty Hate Machine came out, and I'm sorry, 1989, Pretty Hate Machine came out and really started to take off. And in the fall of 1989, after they'd play some shows with Skinny Puppy as an opener in '87, but the recordings weren't out then. And then they ended up touring in the fall with Jesus and Mary Chain, and then Peter Murphy, and those were they were opening on those tours, and they really blew up then. So in March of 1990, Marco went out of town. He's like, we need you to drive the band to Chicago to do the Head Like Hole video. And it was weird because this is another decision time. I had been offered a chance to be the tour manager for the Black Crows because they had taken off with that first record where they covered Too Hot to Handle by Otis Redding,
Yeah.
and I was like, the Black Crows, I'd already just toured with Humble Pie, and it seemed like old music to me, and I also heard they were quite difficult to work with, and even though I'd be not a tour manager with Nine Inch Nails, I was still like, well, they seemed like the future to me, and I was like, they were taking off, and I could see that, And when I met him, we really hit it off. We all got along really well. I got on really well with Trent. And Trent I'd known from the local scene because he was in this band Slam Bamboo, open for Oingo Boingo, and he was in another band called the Exotic Bird. So he was a known commodity in town. I was a known commodity. He respected me as a fellow musician, and I did some rehearsals with them, and he, like Jeff Conley, was another one of those genius guys. You could just tell he was going places because I remember him going up to like Lee Mars, the keyboardist who was on the tour I was about to do with them, in the rehearsals, and he was like showing Lee how to play this stuff and exactly how he played it, and
Yeah.
he could tell people he had perfect pitch, or he has perfect pitch. So Trent, you could just tell he was another wonderkind who was going to just blow up. So when we go to shoot the video for Head Like a Hole, I drive the band up to Chicago with all the gear, and we meet Martin. It was funny because when I was up at the Martin's, and if you haven't been to Martin's Post Punk and Industrial Music Museum, I got the Lammy back here on the wall. You got to go because if you like industrial music or anything of that ilk, go to it because it is like I sent him all my nails magazines and stuff and a lot of flyers and seconds and things I had because it's this amazing mecca to all the stuff he's done, all the punk rock, all the industrial music. It's an amazing experience. So when I went up there, we talked about how we first met, and he didn't remember any of that stuff. It was so funny. So I was reminded him. I realized late in life I have a photographic memory, so I remember all this stuff, and I'm telling him like. Oh, like, I knew who Martin was before we went to meet him, and I knew he'd been in Killing Joke, he'd been in Public Image, he was in Brian Brain, and et cetera, played with Ministry. So I go and I'm picking up his cases and loading them into the van. I'm like, wow, Ministry and Public Image, loading it up. And I go up to his loft to get his stuff, and who should be there but Steve Albini and Bob Weston are putting a studio in his loft when I'm there. So I met Steve and Bob for the first time, and they were very nice, and just chatted with them for a minute, and then we shot the video at Exit Lounge in Chicago, and it was wild, man. I mean, like as I told you, Trent, they strung him up with the. I had to like bring him down the shot at the end, the point of view shot when they're shooting him writhing up and down at the end of the video. I would help lower him back down, stand him back up, and get him ready for a second shoot of the song.
Yeah.
And as well as I ran the smoke machine and like helped set the band up. But Martin they were serving him drinks, and ended up getting really loaded, trashed his drum kit, which you could see him do in the video. And he got in a cab and just went home and forgot about it. We took him his drums the next day, but he didn't remember any of that stuff, which is really funny. And so we were just talking about all that stuff, and I did the Liars book reading and all that at the museum. But yeah, that was the first thing I did for the Nails, and then we took off for a West Coast tour, and it was just incredible. So we did this West Coast tour. Me, Bob Henning, the lighting director, and Marco drove from Cleveland to San Francisco in 44 hours straight in a 14-foot box truck with all the Nails gear in it.
Oh,
Which is
geez.
insane. Yeah, no stopping, just straight driving through. And John Malm, the manager at the time, his dad did metal work, and they'd made a drum riser out of like corrugated metal, and it was a metal screening. And Bob Henning used to put lights underneath it that were these little pin spots that rotated, and he'd run a smoke machine. And Chris Frenna would have these like light waves going in between him and stuff. It was really cool. We ended up using that with Die Warsaw as well, but that was our bed, was the folded over drum machine. We put a mattress on top of it, so we would sleep. One man sleeps while the other man drives, and as we drove to San Francisco and started a West Coast tour. And that was when Jerry Gerard, and God love him, I love Jerry, he's a decent guy, but that was really like a fucking dartboard tour. I mean, it's like we started and we drove to San Francisco, did the show at Palo Alto at this club called The Edge, then went back to San Francisco, played the I Beam, and then we went to God, we went all the way down and played in San Diego. Actually, we played this insane show in Los Angeles at this club called Helter Skelter, which is also called the Club with No Name, which was complete bedlam. That I think I told that story before, but I'll reiterate it again. So it's like basically an old grocery store that had been cleared out, and there was a stage about a foot high,
Oh,
and we set up our
jeez.
gear, and yeah, no security, no nothing, and the Rat Sound pulled up right in front, in the Dave Levine or Dave Rat pulled up in the Black Flag truck with the 4 bars on the back, and that was our PA system. Was Black Flag's PA system. It was Dave Rat, and that was our first meeting of Dave Rat, Carrie Kais, who was his girlfriend at the time, and later his wife, and the mother of his children, of their children, and Brian Rat, who became a dear lifelong friend of mine. They're all lifelong friends of mine, but we all met them that day, and they were our sound company, and they ran sound for the show, and it was just fucking bedlam. I mean, you picture like 1,200 kids in this fucking grocery store, fucking 12-inch stage, and like the show ended with me literally up against the drum riser, standing, a large me standing on Trent's microphone during Head Like a Hole with kids piled up like literally on top of each other like cordwood, pawing at the band while I tried to hold them at bay
Oh,
while we hit
jeez.
like a hole. And then the band like took off and ran to the bus, and I had to like clear everybody off the stage with like fucking mag, like get the fuck off the stage, and trying to steal shit. Things are going left and right, and just absolute bedlam. But it was an insane show, and that happened everywhere we fucking went. And it was like, this band has arrived. So we fucking went and we played in all the way down in San Diego. We get to San Diego at the Bacchanal, and I remember it's me and Bob Henning in the truck, and we were driving. This is back when I still would drive truck and do all the production management, and I remember this is before like I had a credit card, and like I had like an early debit card, and Marco forgot to float me gas money. And and I remember seeing the bus pull away. This is the first time they ever had a tour bus. So they were all on the bus and they're pulling out of the parking lot. I'm like, I, I don't have any fucking float money. And we had to drive from San Diego to fucking Vancouver
Oh,
and
jeez.
finish in Seattle. And it was a total dartboard tour. It was absolutely insane. So I ended up using our money to get us to, somehow I floated enough money to get us gas money to get up there, but it was insane, that kind of stuff. That was a dartboard tour. So we ended up in Seattle at this club called Oz. And all the shows were like that. The Bacchanal was just like the Bacchanal. It was insane. Same kind of thing. And it was so weird because it was like what I call the black clad masses. It was like all and keep in mind, hair metal had died in like 89, 90 because they were all doing fucking power ballads and shit.
Yeah.
So like all these kids coming out of the woodwork are like dreadlock white kids with tattoos and piercings and completely dressed in black, and you're like, where the fuck have you people been for the last 8, 10 years? It's like goth had kind of gone underground and all this shit, and you're just like, what the. And then they came out of the woodwork, and there they were again. And you'd go out to the bus or the truck before the show, and there's 500 kids down the street, and you're like, what the fuck. And yeah, so it was obvious. I remember when we were in Seattle, Trent had a copy. I don't know how he showed it to me, but he had a video copy. I think he brought in a TV that had a VCR in it or something, or brought in a VCR, and he played me fucking the clip of Head Like a Hole, and they just started playing it on MTV. And I was like, wow, I was like, wow, I actually was part of that. And so that was really cool. And after that, the band just took right off. And right after we finished that, we did another, we did a summer tour of 1990 with Meet Me Manifesto. I went all over the country. That was another dartboard tour. I mean, everywhere from the West Coast to, Montreal and back down again, different clubs all over the East Coast and West Coast. I'd have to go back and look at some of the itineraries on some of those, but all those shows were crazy. I remember we played this one night, excuse me, allergies are really kicking in. Um, we were playing in I think it was Baltimore, and this kid comes up to Sean Bevan. I told Martin the story, and he really got a kick out of it. And they go up to Sean Bevan, the sound man. They go, "I really like that song, Eyes of a Puppet," because Trent goes, "I was up above it, I was up above it, now I'm down in it," And this, so Martin was like, just cracking up. He's like, eyes of a puppet. That's hilarious. That's fucking hilarious. It's just because eyes of a puppet.
That that's
Yeah,
that's like my I heard a girl I went to high school with slap my fish for Prodigy smack my bitch up slap my fish that I
my fish.
heard so
Well, I'll tell you a funny another misheard steer. This is in the book as well. But when I was 2 weeks before I joined Humble Pie, they were in Thunder Bay, Ontario, playing up in Canada. Way the fuck up in Thunder Bay, and an Inuit walks into this bar in native garb, walks up to the stage and like goes, "Hey man," and to the tune of Smoke on the Water starts going, "Slow motion Walter, the fire engine guy." And they're just like sitting there, mouths agape, like, shit.
Wow.
So
Okay. All
that's the story
right.
of slow motion Walter. You'll never hear Smoke on the Water ever again. So you'll have to see that go on. So yeah, so the Nails, we did the tour with Meat Beat Manifesto, and then in December of that year, we started at the Fantasy. God bless Michelle from the Fantasy. She just passed away from pancreatic cancer. The owner of the Fantasy who supported the Nails. And we opened the Sin tour like New Year's Eve of 1990, going into 1991 at the Fantasy, and that was when Trent asked me and Fritz, our monitor engineer, to play guitar on Head Like a Hole. And that was when we had the full metal setup. We had conduit, like 3-inch key clamp piping
Hmm.
in front of the back line. And then on top of the drummer was cyclone fencing, and they built a cage, and I would climb up that and stand on top of Jeff Ward, the drummer. Jeff had replaced Chris Renner by that point. Um, Regardless. And Jeff Ward from Ministry was playing with the Nails on that tour, and I would stand up and play guitar on top of the cage through an amp, and live with the band. And Trent loved that, so I was like the go grinder guitar player for that tour. We did that all over the U.S. and Canada on that tour. The Sin tour, and Die Warsaw was the opener. And we had a couple other openers on that particular tour, but we went all over the U.S. and Canada doing that tour, and I played guitar with them all over the country and in Canada doing that particular bit, playing guitar and Head Like a Hole. And we went out and played with Jane's Addiction, and we opened and closed two shows, opener and the closer out of 4 shows at the Universal Amphitheater. We got invited with them, and they were touring on Ritual de lo Habitual, which I had done a bunch of work on promotions at Warner Brothers, and so we all loved that record. It was like amazing. So Trent called me in the spring after that tour, and he's like, "We're gonna do this tour, man, with Jane's Addiction. It's gonna be called Lollapalooza. It's gonna be really amazing, man." I'm like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, I'm there." Well, yeah, and it's like it'll be really easy, man. 45-minute set. It'll be so easy. It'll be really cool. And I'm like, "Great, great, I'm there." And then, so that led up to the Lollapalooza tour. We talked about the patinas getting pulled off the stage and
Yeah, yeah.
head and all that stuff. And then, we did another show in like Albuquerque, and then we did another show in. I think we did one of the shows we did was in Arizona, and I had an early when we did the Head Like a Whole video. Jumping back for a minute, when we did the Head Like a Whole video, I picked up all the band gear and out of the trailer came this broken super strat. It was an ash bodied, broken neck, and it was a BC Rich. It was one of their super strats, not one of the fucked up, Mockingbirds or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever. Know what I'm talking about? The bitch, rich bitch. So it was a super strat looking body, but the neck had broken off. So I asked Trent, I'm like, "Hey, what are you gonna do with that?" He goes, "Oh, you can have it." So I gave it to me. I took it home and started fucking with it, put a new neck on it, and built it into a really cool guitar. It has a 59 patent applied for mini soap bar, and then a Bill Lawrence pickup and some other shit in it. It's really cool. A P90 in it and stuff.
Nice.
It's wicked rebuild. And I took that out on tour with the Nails to play as a backup guitar and Had Like a Hole. and Trent smashed that guitar on one of the up on the dates for Lollapalooza, so I didn't get to play it on Lollapalooza. It ended up spending like until we got back to Cleveland, it spent the rest of its time in the bus because he in the bay of the bus because he'd fucked it up so bad. I didn't have on Lollapalooza I didn't have all my tools to like work on shit even though I had I had a toolkit and stuff, but I didn't have time to work on that because he broke so many goddamn guitars, on that particular thing. And I think I've talked about that how I used to have to go and it's procure his guitars for him.
Every show, every time you guys stopped, you were running to buy more guitars. You were hitting up the pawn
Yeah,
shops every time you guys stopped in town. You were running to buy
yeah.
to the pawn shops.
It's
Yeah.
funny that book on Lollapalooza came out, and I reiterate that story in there, so it's in that book as well. But don't buy their book, buy my book. I got it. I give Rich Beanstalk and Tom Bajor credit. They did a good job writing about the Lollapalooza tours, which a lot of people haven't done. And they told the truth. The only thing that bummed me out is when they listed me as with Ministry. I was the chief guitar tech with Ministry. They listed me as a roadie. I roadied for the late Mike Scotia, Al Jorgensen. I was a guitar tech for the late Mike Scotia, Al Jorgensen, and Sam Ladwag on that tour, and then later all these other cats who came along that I worked for when after Sam and other people had left the tour. But I was the chief guitar tech for Ministry on Lollapalooza, and on the second Lollapalooza tour, and ended up like singing with Pearl Jam on "Rockin' in the Free World," and they used to do Sonic Reducer by the Dead Boys, and I'm like, hey man, I knew Stu Bader, and I'm from Cleveland, man, and they're like, well, come sing backups, so I sang backups with them and stuff, and Eddie Vedder and I used to back up Chris Cornell on Outshined and stuff like that, and the
You did a
second
lot of stuff on Lollapalooza, actually. When we've talked before, you did a whole lot of stuff on Lollapalooza.
yeah, well, the first one was crazy because like, and the crazy thing about that was on the first Lollapalooza tour, nobody stayed at the same. That's the difference between the two. Nobody stayed. Well, there's a plenty, but nobody stayed at the same hotels. It was like Nine Inch Nails crew shared a tour bus with the Rollins band, and we shared a travel agent with the Butthole Surfers. So that was really great because Nine Inch Nails and crew and Rollins band were all friends because we shared the bus, and I knew the Butthole Surfers from when Death on a Stick played with them, so we were all friends, and it was always great because we always knew who we were going to get high with at the end of the night, high and fucked up with. So we'd like go out to we'd end up at some Red Roof Inn out in the sticks with Butthole Surfers and hang with them and go to some restaurants and run around or hang out. We all took mushrooms one day and went to Disney World.
That had
And
to be interesting.
it said that me it was like me and Sim and Andrew and me and Fritz and um I'm trying to think, and a couple of the Butthole Surfers. We all dropped we all ate mushrooms, and when we went to Disneyland, that was pretty great. And the Jane's Addiction guys were with us too, but they didn't know we were high. you know, I think Dave was trying to be sober at that point, but Dave was there with his gal at the time, which was pretty fun. We had a really great time hanging with them. But that was the kind of crazy shit we did back then. But yeah, so we stayed at different hotels on that tour, and it was kind of weird because we were kind of isolated from the band, and we didn't have the greatest of communication with them, and it was a rough tour. It was different, but so many great shows on that tour though too. I mean, Jane's Addiction every night, it was like an amazing show. Ice T and Body Count. I mean, Ice T would come out and do half the set of gangster rap, and then he'd come out with Body Count and do the other half with Body Count, and they were amazing. And I mean, Rollins was great. Butthole Surfers were amazing. Um, the Nails every night. Everybody wanted to see us, and most nights we crushed it. There was a few mishaps as we've talked about before. I mean, obviously the meltdown. A lot of people want to know about the meltdown and at the first show, and people are like, "Oh, they see the tape deck. The tape got eaten." No, that's not what happened. What happened was there was a bad quad box, and we had everything plugged into the drum rack. We had a drum rack, and there was a Tascam 4-track cassette player in there, and that's what the drummer had a click track to.
Mhm.
It we had these two giant monitors, these two EV monitors on either side of the stage, and all that stuff was connected into the drum rack. And there was a bad quad box, and like we're 2/3 of the way into Terrible Lie, and all of a sudden the power goes down, so the whole drum rack and all the backline, the guitar amps and everything goes down. And Trent's like, "What the fuck happened?" So Mark O'Shea fortunately saw that the drum rack had become unplugged, so he ran back there, plugged it in, it was like, "Brrr," and up comes the sound. We finished Terrible Lie. We go into the song Sin, and then we're a couple bars into Sin, and it just the goes down again, and we lost all power. And Trent just trashes the stage and runs off the stage. And he literally trashed the stage, broke everything, and said, fire the crew and fuck everyone. So he goes on the bus, and I guess MTV followed him on there, and he said something to the effect of like, "We're at the mercy of electrical power and crew incompetence." And even though we were, kind of hurt by that, it was like, we dealt with, Trent and failures, electronic failures before, so it wasn't killing us. But the Lollapalooza people, the Curly Jobson and Kevin Lyman, who were the production managers, and the people, Delicate Sound, were not thrilled with the fact that, like, he felt like they were blaming them. And it turns out there was a bad quad box that Delicate Sound had, and Mark O'Shea went back and had him test it, and sure enough, the quad box, where the drum rack was plugged in, was fucked up. So that's really what fucked up the show. And I've seen people pontificate about, their tape deck melted. I mean, I think, the bassist, Steven Severin, with Jane's Addiction, or I mean, with Susie and the Band, she says that in the Lollapalooza book. It was either him or John Klein, the guitarist, or whatever. But we ended up becoming good friends with the Susie people later in the show. They were very private to, I later became friends with Susie and Steven. But they were very, British, very proper, and were very sort of isolated from everybody. We didn't really get to know them until much later. So,
That's wild.
yeah,
That's wild. But we've been at this a while. I know you've got a wife who had surgery, and you need to make sure she's taken care of.
I
So,
do. Yeah, we'll pick up another time, because I'm getting. It says your Mac battery will soon run out if you about to run low. But we'll get back to other stuff later. But you got some good material here.
yes, and I do thank you for sitting down. Especially for those who don't know, his wife just had her hip replaced just last 2 weeks ago or last
Oh
week.
no, it's been a month as of.
Um,
So I am a caregiver too. So yep.
Yeah, so he's got to get back to taking care of his wife. So thank you again. We'll definitely, I know you've got a couple things we'll figure out. Hopefully, I don't have to tackle you to get you to sit down and we don't have to wait as long. But thank you again. And thank you
That's
so
okay.
much. I appreciate your time. And we'll definitely catch up. And once YouTube does the processing live stream, I'll make sure I'll dig through YouTube and get the links to your books and everything plugged in there and your channel so we can get it all in there. And thank you again. Thank you so much. I
My pleasure.
appreciate it, man. And you have a good evening. And everybody, thanks.